Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And those of you, I see a number of people standing, so feel free. It's much easier to talk to faces. So come, there's a few seats in the front row, and I'll buy you some time to work your way up here. So over the next 45 minutes, I'll be talking a bit about broad megatrends that are transforming the manufacturing industry, what the future of manufacturing has to hold, and some bold moves, transformative opportunities that are ahead. And really, through the course of the next 45, 50 minutes, there'll be a number of pieces of information. And my goal isn't for you to be bogged down into the details, but rather to take away some key insights, perhaps a new lens to look through not only what you're doing today, but your vision ahead, and then some pragmatic steps on how to navigate through this fog of opportunity that is presented here in the future of manufacturing. So I'll start here. I know it's early, I know everyone's getting caffeinated, but want to get a quick pulse. How many of you have at least heard the term Industry 4.0? Please raise your hands. Perfect. Exactly what I'd hope and expect from this type of audience. Therefore, I'm not going to talk about it a lot, right? It's a term that we've all heard. It's really leading, a lot of elements and causing a lot of angst with a lot of our clients, I'm sure many of you. But essentially, what I'd like to focus in terms of Industry 4.0 is how it's fundamentally different than the three other industrial revelations that we've gone through in history. So what I'd like to focus on is why it's different. And that's fundamentally the pace of change is transformally different than it was in the last three industrial revolutions. And what I mean by that is that for the first three industrial revolutions, essentially things were coming at us in a pace that we could understand, we could comprehend, we could adjust our operations. But this industrial revolution, the pace is astronomical, and that's what's causing so much angst about what the future holds. So I'll talk a little bit about why that is. Why is it fundamentally coming at us much faster, much more complex, and then walk through some pragmatic steps in order to adjust and to be more flexible and to take note and have opportunity. So has anyone heard of Ray Kurzweil or Singularity University? Probably not as many hands there. Good, actually more than I thought. So Ray Kurzweil is essentially deemed one of the most accurate futurists in the world as we know it. He's often cited. He leads Google engineering alongside founded Singularity University with Peter Diamandis. And the core premise of his book, I distilled it in one slide, if you will. It's talking about how we have lived in a linear world. The last three industrial revolutions have essentially taken place on a linear path. It's predictable. It's something that our human minds can get around. But the pace that technology is advancing, particularly in the last few decades, isn't linear. It's been exponential. All of you are familiar with Moore's law, the doubling effect. And so if you think about it, if I take 30 steps, literally 1, 2, 3. We all know where I'm going to end at the end of the 30 steps, right? I'll probably be back by where everyone's standing, and I'd welcome you to still come in. But that's predictable, right? We can get our human minds around where we'll be at the end of those 30 steps. We'll be at the end of this conference room, correct? What's harder for our human minds to get around is the exponential effect. Where we'll be in 30 exponential steps. Spoiler alert, I have it on the slide. But we'd be 26 times around the world. That is an incredible pace. That is something that, quite honestly, our human minds aren't equipped to handle. We have a hard time getting our minds around the exponential change, the pace that this technology is transforming. I think it was a great introduction in terms of just to see where you were in August to where you're at now. Look at this room. Look at the technology pace. You're introducing new products later today. I think these are all evidence and signals that we're seeing throughout manufacturing in a wide set of technologies, including robotics. And so, it's the lens that I hope, that you take away from this slide, the lens of thinking about exponential change and the pace of change and starting to get your minds around what that means. So you ask about exponential technologies, exponential enablers. Here's just a brief list so these technologies are all moving at exponential pace. I listed advanced robotics because that's probably very near and dear to your heart. I listed that first. But there are a number of other technologies that are all moving up that same exponential curve, right? And they're all happening not in silos. These are converging. And not only the technologies, but the enablers as well. So we think of organizational and process enablers that are also moving at exponential pace. So as the physical and digital worlds are converging, you're looking at many different areas that this convergence is happening. And therefore, you're seeing some of these occurring today throughout all industries, not just manufacturing. And so here, again, is, this is what some of the effects of this technological pace and the change. We're seeing computing power, storage power, bandwidth, all the price and the economics drastically going down. So the cost to do business is fundamentally much different, much easier. And as I allude to, it's making major ramifications across all sorts of industries. So the question really becomes, if it's happened so many other places, why not manufacturing? Why not? Why not? And the answer is it is. And so what I'd ask is that, it's all about a mind shift. It's all about looking through this. You can look at it one of two ways, disruption or opportunity. I'm an engineer, I'm pragmatic, I'm also half glass, half full. I look at it as an abundance of opportunity that we have. I think all of you here today, the fact that you're at this conference about collaborative robotics, you're on the pulse of change and you're already starting to lead that change. There are many others in the manufacturing industry that are wanting to hold on to what they know and what they love today. So I think there's two sides of the same coin, and fundamentally those that look at where we're at in this fourth industrial revolution, look at it as an opportunity, I think they'll be well served. So today, the three major questions that I'd like to focus on is really, what's going on with the global manufacturing landscape? Who's winning? Who's slated to win in the future of manufacturing? As well as what are the key drivers that really impact manufacturing competitiveness? And then lastly, I'd really like to give you a few frameworks to think about, to take home, to think about over the next few days as to what you do with all of this fundamental change and how you can navigate in order to make each of your individual businesses more successful and more poised for whether it's top line growth or bottom line efficiency. So, manufacturing. It's a very good news story right now. The last year I just took, these are all Newsline clips from the last year, as well as some economic data from the major manufacturing countries. Bottom line, it's a great time to be in manufacturing. We're seeing pace and output very strong globally. So you're in a good business, it's a good place to be in manufacturing. That's the key takeaway here. Also, what I've done over the last decade is it's important to get a pulse of what business executives are thinking. So I lead a research study with the Council on Competitiveness, which was alluded to in my bio. That's a group in the US that was founded under the Reagan administration to advance US competitiveness in all domains. I particularly research efforts around manufacturing competitiveness, and we work with a global federation of competitiveness councils. And what this study has done over the last decade is really taken a pulse of what global manufacturing CEOs, what nations they believe are most competitive today as well as in the future, and takes a look at the key drivers of manufacturing competitiveness. So these are, this is a pulse from over 550 global manufacturing CEOs, your peers and constituents, and a look at what that global manufacturing landscape is. So the results from our most recent study, this is what the global manufacturing executives ranked. The nations that they ranked would be most competitive on the left today and on the right in the future. And so, it's a bit of an eye chart, so I break it down a bit, but I wanted to show you the full list, and all of this is publicly available information, so happy to look online. This is the second half, so we pulse a wide number of manufacturing nations, and we look for key trends, and we've been doing this over a decade as to which nations they feel are most competitive today and 5 years from now, and look for these major trends and movements, if you will, because this is where they're making investments. This is where they look to move their operations, to grow their operations. So, again, I like to break it down, kind of pull it up into the big takeaways, the so what, if you will. Since 2010, what we've seen is really a fundamental shift to advanced manufacturing. So back in 2010, you can see where China ranked and where some of the traditional powerhouse nations, and it was all about cost, and that's no big surprise. We were right in the midst of the financial turndown, and everyone was globalizing and offshoring, and cost and efficiency were front and center. And now you look at projections for 2020, and you see the US, for the first time ever, has surpassed China. So global manufacturing executives are indicating that the US will be the most competitive nation for manufacturing by 2020. And we see a whole host of other traditional manufacturing powerhouses, nations that have strong innovation ecosystems, nations that have invested heavily in their manufacturing industry, and those that are making the most complex, sophisticated products that we as manufacturers make. So we're seeing this trend take place. Here's some secondary data to kind of back that up, if you will. So what I did here is I took the Global Manufacturing Competitiveness Index rankings, the GMCI rankings, and supplemented them with what are their manufacturing exports. So you can see the portion of the bubble that is blue. I'll use my laser pointer right here. These are high-skill, high-tech manufacturing exports, and you can see those nations that have more than 50% of their exports that are increasing essentially are correlated very significantly to manufacturing executives feeling that they're going to be more competitive in the future. Those nations, including China, which is a big one, as well as India and Brazil, you can see that the portion of their manufacturing exports isn't as high-tech as the ones on the top, and you see the GMCI ranking going down. So advanced technologies, innovation, talent, these are going to be some of the key differentiators, moving forward according to global manufacturing executives. As I alluded to before, again, the US being the #1 nation in terms of global manufacturing competitiveness by 2020. This is the first time ever that global manufacturing executives are ranking the US in the #1 spot, which is very significant. And so again, we're seeing this battleground play out. We're seeing both the US as well as China and many other nations competing for this vibrant manufacturing economy. And so just again here in the last year, a number of investments, major investments in the global landscape. With that, we also see that different nations want their fair share of the pie, right? So we're seeing a lot more activity in governments in helping. So I'm from Chicago, US. Industrial policy in the US isn't always thought of the most highly, but in other nations, they recognize how significant manufacturing is to economic prosperity. So I've done a number of separate research efforts with the World Economic Forum, Future of Manufacturing, Manufacturing for Growth. Those were both year-long studies that are publicly available from Davos. And it fundamentally, I've worked with Harvard and MIT in that proving that the more complex products that a nation makes, the stronger their manufacturing is. It has a direct linkage on economic prosperity. And so the news is out. And so governments and countries are looking, and that's why we're seeing a lot more government activity in terms of enabling manufacturing, creating an ecosystem, an environment for manufacturing to flourish. So although we're seeing essentially the green bars, if you will, are FDI investment globally in manufacturing. So you see in the past few years, that's relatively constant. But what you'll notice is the lighter green, if you will, a lot more cross-border M&A activity. So when we take all of the global manufacturing competitiveness landscape and take it down to the company level, what we're seeing is a lot more cross-border activity. There's a lot more shifts. We're, no news here. We're more global than we were 5 years ago, and we're going to increasingly be more global. So this global manufacturing landscape is getting more complex, it's getting more connected, and we're seeing this take shape in even M&A deals. So this is one slide that I always like to show because it takes that GMCI ranking and really puts it to light. So these bubbles right here are the top 15 nations, according to global manufacturing executives, that will be the most future competitive by 2020. So these are the top manufacturing competitive nations by 2020. And what you see is a clustering effect, right? So on your left, you'll see North America, where we're at today. All 3 nations are in the top 10 by 2020. On the right, what you'll see is 10 out of the top 15 nations by 2020 are going to be in Asia. We see in the middle, Europe kind of getting squeezed, if you will. If you look at prior results, there were more European nations that were ranked in the top 15 in prior studies. But what we're seeing is really just the UK and Germany, according to global manufacturing executives, are going to be in the most competitive nations moving forward. And so with that, you also see major nations, whether it's US, Germany, China, and then a clustering effect of other nations. And you see, we coined the term Mighty Five. So Asia nations that are moving up, Malaysia, India, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, those 5 nations moving up into the top 15 ranking by 2020. So it's really interesting to look at the global shifts and changes because as manufacturers, that's where new operations are going to be. Consumer demand in Asia obviously isn't going to go down. So it gives us a little bit of insight as to why these shifts are occurring and what global manufacturing executives are thinking the future holds. Another thing that we pulse global manufacturing executives are, what are the key drivers of manufacturing competitiveness? And what they've been consistent for the last decade is talent is the #1 driver for manufacturing competitiveness. Talent is going to be the key differentiator moving forward in terms of manufacturing competitiveness. And I think that's something that all of you can take home, right? Your talent, the individuals in your operations, how are we moving the needle? How are we transforming talent for the future of manufacturing? And so what we talk about, I'll go back one slide, If you look at talent, cost competitiveness, workforce productivity, and supplier network, those top 4, if you will. If you weave them all together, that gets into a much more complex idea. The idea that it's not you and you alone, it's your supply base, it's what you're doing on the shop floor as well as design and have it all integrated. And it's the idea of the ecosystem. And so this was an interesting finding as well, that these 4 together are really all about a vibrant ecosystem, a vibrant innovation ecosystem. And so conceptually, what we're talking about in terms of the innovation ecosystem is kind of the closed loop between the knowledge economy and the commercialization economy. So thinking about R&D investments and taking that into technology breakthroughs and then commercializing them through new products or new processes, and then increasing sales, which then in turn feeds more R&D. And so it's this closed loop process between knowledge and commercialization. And at the company level or the corporate level, as well as the country level, I think a lot of successful individuals are looking at how to influence, how to enhance, how to bolster their own innovation ecosystem. So what we did is, for the US, we mapped out what the innovation ecosystem looks like. So think of where basic research takes place in the national labs, the National Network of Manufacturing Innovation Institutes, where they're translating basic, fundamental technology to more applied technology. And then the industry, my clients, a number of you in the audience, how they're commercializing that technology. We're seeing that fundamentally get more connected and more integrated, and that's going on globally, not just the US. We've also looked at Fraunhofer in Germany, what's going on in Singapore, Israel. These are hotbeds of innovation ecosystem, and it's translating to more commercial opportunities as well. So I think, again, focusing on talent. The innovation ecosystem is a sum of talent, essentially. And so when we look at talent, the key issues that manufacturers face is there is a huge skills gap taking place. I'm, again, most familiar with the US, so this study that I've conducted with the NAM, which is America's largest manufacturing industry association, we've conducted a skills gap that's projecting in the US between 2015 and 2025 that 2 million jobs will go unfilled simply because there isn't enough talent for those open positions. Manufacturing executives actually indicate that 6 out of 10 of their current openings are due to that skills shortage, that they aren't able to find qualified and enough individuals. There's a lot more stats to that study. It talks about how they've tried to throw money at the situation. They're paying above average wages. It's a supply and demand issue. There simply isn't enough supply. You can look at baby boomer retirements being a huge component. You can look at the perception of the industry and how we're competing against the Silicon Valleys of the world. There are a number of factors. Women in manufacturing in the US, there's a 20-point differential. We make up 47% of the workforce, but only 27% in manufacturing. By this audience, I think advanced robotics could use a little more fair share of their women as well. So there's a number of factors taking place that is causing this talent shortage, if you will. And I always like to, given that this is a global audience, what I did is we do another study with Manpower organization globally and looking, cross-industry, what the shortages are. And you can see that the global average, 40% are having difficulty finding jobs across all industries. And you can see the US, Canada's actually doing pretty well in that they're a little bit below average, meaning that you're having an easier time filling jobs. But you can see the global average is 40%, the US is 46%, and then there's places like Japan where the demographic issue is quite severe. And so this is going to be a fundamental issue moving forward for all manufacturers. Who you have on your team, how you grow that team, how you keep them, how you retain them, how you advance them. Because it's only going to get worse. The competitive factor in your talent is going to be one of your key differentiators moving forward. So think about that. Think about, as you go back to the office, what you can do to ensure that you're going to be getting your fair share in the future. So really, since we're all here today and for the next couple of days about robotics, so I wanted to double click a little bit into that talent issue and for collaborative robotics, what that means too. So, we see this talent shortage happening all across the world. Again, there's news stats, almost daily. Every executive interview that I talk about, one of their key, what keeps them up at night is the talent shortage. And, so there's this misconception, or there's this fundamental issue about, or question, are robots going to take over what we do today? I think there's this leery, sci-fi, we don't want to get too close to it. Maybe this is what a number of your clients are thinking, right? Until they get to see it and understand. I'm getting a little feedback, sorry. So really the fundamental point here is that to demystify, there's a talent shortage. There aren't enough people to do what needs to be done. And I think robotics, and particularly collaborative robotics, is a great way to help address that need. And that it's the idea that it's not replacing workers, but it's helping them. It's taking what they do today and automating the simple, kind of routine, mundane, the jobs that people don't want, and freeing up that intellectual power, the knowledge that they have, in order to advance your operations, advance what could be done. So it's really taking that top talent and better serving your operations and your businesses by freeing up the tasks that robots can do. And I think, whether it's AI or cognitive, there's so many technologies that are transforming manufacturing as a whole, and with that talent gap, that it's really enabling manufacturers to take the talent that they have today and to use it to the better of the company, to use it in a more value-add way. So in the future, it's really not about the replacement, but the combination. It's humans and machines working together to advance company and country-level competitiveness. And so here we're seeing, on the major players, we're seeing major investments by majority of manufacturers in various technologies. Again, we're here for robotics, but we're seeing it around additive manufacturing, we're seeing it around high-performance computing, major investments, M&A deals taking place. Manufacturers are recognizing that advanced technologies and talent are going to be the key differentiators moving forward, and they're making sizable investments. So I think it's another really good news story. You're out of manufacturing is already a very good place to be. Cognitive robotics, a very good place to be as well. So I think in terms of the amount of investment that's taking place, it's increasingly. So what I want to make sure to bring it all back, we took a very high level lens of the global manufacturing landscape. What nations are rising to the top, where you might see some of your clients moving to or doubling down their investments in. We looked at a lot of the key drivers of manufacturing competitiveness, talent, innovation, ecosystems rising to the top. But fundamentally, here's 4 aspects that you can take tomorrow and start thinking about in terms of your operations, how you really create and capture value in the future. And I think first and foremost, it's about your customer, right? Whether it's a B2B or a B2C, thinking about customer expectations and how rapidly, as these technologies are progressing, your customer expectations are increasing as well, right? So how do you satisfy your customer expectations of tomorrow? How do you do that better? So much of opportunity is about changing human behavior. So the technologies are enablers, but it's all about what we're fundamentally trying to change, right? If you take top line growth or bottom line efficiency, someone physically or mentally has to do something different to enable those things, right? And so thinking about how you're going to capture and create more value through meeting your customer expectations is one key premise that we all have in common in this room. Second is staying current with exponential technology. So this is happening at a pace that's unprecedented. It's significant, and it's occurring across multiple technologies. So none of us can have enough mental bandwidth to be experts in all domains. So it goes hand in hand with the third item, is really laying out a framework or kind of an ecosystem for you to tap into so that you can stay current in these technologies. So I think, you're heavy users and sophisticated operators of robotics, but there are a number of interplays. So we start talking about AI or high performance computing, and that takes robotics to a whole new level, right? So it's how the use and the convergence of multiple technologies work together to unlock new opportunities. And how do you do that? It's through a partnership, it's through an ecosystem, looking at what your competitors are doing versus what you're doing, and who they're partnering with, and who they're learning from and adjusting from. So really looking at your operations, less of a silo and more of an ecosystem approach, who you're taking with you on that ride, and who you're learning and developing and growing with. I think the future of manufacturing will be much more of an ecosystem play and a platform approach than the singular company approach that we have today. And fourthly, looking at new business model opportunities. So I think historically we've looked at top line growth, bottom line efficiency, but there's a lot more activity in terms of joint partnerships, in terms of collaborative R&D, consortiums, bringing, again, the platform approach, kind of the ecosystem approach into mind. Also looking at manufacturing much more as a service-oriented business. Data is going to be the new oil of the industry. So how are you creating value from that data? How are you capturing it? How are you looking at your business fundamentally different in order to tap into new sources of value? So these four elements, I think, are incredibly important, moving forward, and things that you can all think about, over the course of the next couple of days, as well as, when you get back. And the idea of kind of thinking big, and then starting small, and acting fast. And so when we think about that, again, I'm an engineer, I like to be pragmatic, I like to break it down. Again, what can you do tomorrow? What can you do on Monday when you get back? It's taking the lens that we just looked through, the global manufacturing landscape, zooming out, kind of understanding where the movements are happening, and then zooming in to your business, what you can fundamentally do in the next 6 to 12 months, thinking about 2 or 3 just initiatives to pilot, to approach. Think about how you can make active steps to better yourself and to better your position in the future of manufacturing. And really, have those 2 to 3 efforts, a marriage of your long-term goals in that future of manufacturing and what you can do tomorrow. So it's setting you on the pathway for that North Star of where you want to be a few years from now. I think another important premise when you go back to your jobs on Monday is kind of the shaping strategies mentality. And that has to do with the ecosystem, right, that I talked about, that so much of what is happening in business today is becoming a platform approach. So, for instance, Apple is a very successful technology company, right? Many would say, that their innovation or their greatest breakthrough was the iPhone. But fundamentally, it was the platform that they created with all of the apps and all of the other developers that created value that was much larger than just their product themselves. That's truly what was differentiating from them. You can think of that with Airbnb, you can think of that as Uber. These are all platform approaches, right? It's taking the value, it's using assets and technologies outside of what you do and creating value from them. It's looking for new ways to fundamentally structure your business in order to capture that value. And so I think mobilizing investment around those platform plays could be another area that you could look for opportunities. So five key last closing areas. Again, focusing on customer needs. I think that's first and foremost. We can do a lot of great things, but at the end of the day, we create and capture value by focusing on our customer. So that is first and foremost. Number two, taking a portfolio approach. So knowing that kind of the Silicon Valley type, fail fast, fail often approach. So looking at your strategy, breaking it down into what's core, what's adjacent, what's transformative, and really taking a measured approach at where you're going to make your investments and having a balance across the short and long-term strategy. And that breaks down to three. So not just saying that you're going to make transformative bets, but that you actually structure your business and you invest accordingly. So whatever your trajectory is going to be, make sure that your organization is structured and that your investments kind of back up that strategic portfolio approach. Fourth gets to the platform and ecosystem again, that you think outside of your traditional walls. Your suppliers, your customers, are those individuals or entities that you could collaborate in the future to create more value with? How can you fundamentally do things a little bit different than you're doing today in order to create and unlock new forms of value that you're simply not equipped or don't have the capability or capacity to do today? So think about your customers as well as your clients kind of in a new light. And lastly, adapt and persevere. So what the pace that this change is taking place, I think the most important thing is to learn how to adjust and to adapt and to be flexible. So how do you make the operations that you do today, by nature, more flexible, so that as these changes, we're moving up the curve so quickly that no one can predict exactly what the future is going to look like a few years from now. But is your organization flexible enough to adapt? So I think with that, taking a look at society as a whole and where we've come, I think what we've seen through time is that it's not the strongest species that survive or the most intelligent, but the ones that are most responsive to change. And so with that, I'd ask that you take a look at your operations and think what you can do in the future to poise yourself for the manufacturing of growth and the future of manufacturing. Thank you.